Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Nicaragua webinar entitled Terps Abroad, University of Maryland Students Explore Agroecology in Nicaragua. We'll hear from the speakers, followed by a period for questions and answers. Many thanks to Yoav Elenevsky, who's providing our technical support. And we also thank our many organizational co-sponsors who are going to be listed now in the chat. My name is Barbara Larkham, and I'll serve as the moderator today. I'm the co-organizer of the Nicaragua webinar series along with Nan McCurdy, and I'm serving as the current chair of Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition. You'll see that there's a chat function available at the bottom of your screen for you to offer comments throughout this event. We'll also be posting other information and links in the chat. There's another function for captions. Just click on that function if you'd like to turn that on. And there's another button labeled Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Please place your questions for the speakers in the Q&A, not in the chat, to make sure that we see them. We're going to pull your questions. We're going to pull your questions from the Q&A to pose to the speakers. Be patient, we're making note of all the questions, but they may not be answered until the Q&A period. Before we begin, we have several announcements. We'll make sure to post all the information and the links in the chat as well. Today's event is part of an ongoing monthly series about Nicaragua. Please mark your calendars now for the next 2 webinars in the series. On May 28th, the title is The View from the Ground, What We Experienced in Nicaragua in 2018. The speakers are 4 people who lived through the attempted coup and who will describe how it has affected their current effort and understanding. And on June 25th, our webinar is entitled ALBA TCP, First Fair Trade Agreement in the World, and how the US tried to destroy it. It will feature speakers from several countries in that agreement. Both of these webinars, May 28th and June 25th, are on Sunday at the same time as today. If you'd like to become more active in supporting Nicaragua's sovereignty and opposing foreign interference there, you're invited to join the new international coalition, Nicaragua Solidarity Coalition. Please check the website regularly at nicasolidarity.net. Also, please put your name and email address in the Q&A if you would like to receive action alerts, our weekly newsletter, and monthly meeting notices from the coalition. This coalition meeting is on Monday, May 8th. To save as much time as possible for this program, we'll enter some other information in the chat about other ways that you can get involved or learn more about Nicaragua. The format for today's 75-minute webinar is the following. First, we'll hear from Nan McCurdy with current news briefs from Nicaragua. Then our 5 featured speakers from University of Maryland will have a total of 30 minutes for their presentation, and the remaining time will be for questions and answers from you. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be sent to all registrants within the next few days. And now to introduce Nan McCurdy, who will provide us with the Nicaragua news briefs. Nan is the editor of the online weekly Nica Notes, published by Alliance for Global Justice. She lived in Nicaragua for over 30 years and continues to have deep connections there. Nan McCurdy, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Barbara. I need to let you know that I couldn't put things in the chat that you had asked me to. I couldn't send it to everyone, so maybe you and Yoav can work on that while I'm speaking. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to share the screen so that I can show you some photos as I'm speaking. Sorry. Can you see that?
Yes, it's good.
Okay. Okay. On April 13th, Minister of Finance Ivan Acosta presented the government's annual report. He said that during 2022, the government continued the program to fight poverty, their most important program, and also consolidated the path of economic growth. He highlighted the 2022 municipal elections, programs to fight poverty and increase security and safety, gender equity advances, Caribbean coast development, environmental policies, and more. US 76 million was provided to micro and small scale agricultural producers in 2022, 51.2% higher than in 2021. The GDP grew 3.8% and exports totaled 7.73 billion, almost 13% more than in 2021. The foreign minister of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov, visited on April 19th and said that together with Nicaragua, they will continue to work hand in hand against interference and intervention. He congratulated Nicaragua on the celebration of the Day of Peace. Thanks to the efforts of Daniel Ortega, the country remains stable, he said. I would like to wish all Nicaraguans peace, prosperity, and stability. I am convinced that the bilateral relations between Russia and Nicaragua will facilitate this process. He referred to the establishment of agreements in areas such as education, transportation, agriculture, and health, especially production of vaccinations. There are many Nicaraguan students studying at Russian universities, he said. An international forum to fight against colonialism was recently held where Nicaraguans participated. Multipolarity is a process that cannot be stopped. It is an objective process, but Westerners under the auspices of the United States try to unite as exclusive countries. They try to proliferate their hegemony in conflicts such as in Ukraine, to increase their influence in the region towards the Pacific, among others, he said. A 2023 poll by M&R Consultants reports that 76% of Nicaraguans approve the work of the government. 86% said that the government generates hope. More than 92% said peace and security should not be put at risk for any reason. 88% believe the institutions resolve issues in a timely manner, and 90.7% said Nicaragua is overcoming the healthcare crisis caused by the pandemic. On April 14th, Nicaragua and China signed agreements to develop programs with support from the China International Development Cooperation Agency. The agreements are for the rehabilitation of 150 megawatts of thermal energy, as well as for 920 affordable homes. This is the second phase of a much larger program to build more than 12,000 homes. The Institute of Agricultural Protection and Health, which is the regulatory agency that tests for contaminants on fresh produce, grains, raw meats, and dairy products, reported that Nicaragua's sanitary status is one of the best in the region, thanks to the rigorous deployment of an agri-food sanitation model throughout the nation's production chain. Nicaragua is recognized for its sanitary status by the World Organization for Animal Health, WOA. The Ministry of Agriculture will have interactive production maps on their webpage. I checked and they're up there. I'd say they're not working to 100% quite yet. To help producers of all crops identify the best areas for planting. The maps allow producers, students, professionals, and the general public to know the production, crops planted, soil fertility by municipality, areas of basic grains, coffee, cocoa, bananas, and others. The maps show areas that use irrigation and the types of system and the water sources. Farmers use 10 million manzanas. One manzana equals 1.7 acres, allowing the country to achieve food sovereignty. The agricultural sector is 14% of the economy, 30% of exports, and generates 29% of employment nationwide. April 19th was declared the National Day of Peace in order to celebrate respect, harmony, and fraternity for prosperity. On the National Day of Peace and throughout the month of April, families, communities, organizations, and the state will implement actions and activities to celebrate the joy of living in peace. Dr. Porras, National Assembly President, said that since the triumph of the revolution, Nicaragua has faced continual U.S. war of aggression, and we preserve peace not only in our territory, but also in the region, a fact that is demonstrated in all the different agreements signed by Nicaragua. Our vocation for peace has always been evident. 2 new high-tech operating rooms were inaugurated at the Berta Calderon Women's Hospital in Managua. In the womb surgeries, as well as surgeries on pregnant women with cancer, will be performed. The operating rooms have high-tech intelligent audio and video systems to watch live fetal surgery inside the mother's wombs. There is an amphitheater for training purposes. British teachers highlighted the quality of the education system in Nicaragua. British educator Heather Marcano said that the integral education that the students receive in Nicaragua reflects the reality of a country rich in culture, nature, and generosity. During the annual conference of the National Educators Union of the United Kingdom in April, members of the recent delegation to Nicaragua shared their experiences. Labor MP Christine Blower confirmed the union's commitment to continue the teacher exchanges with the Nicaragua Teachers Association, ANDEN, to support English as a second language education, to support English as a second language education, and also to deepen relations of friendship and solidarity between the 2 teachers' unions. The National Police in Buaco inaugurated a modern crime laboratory with scientific technical equipment to make analyses that are required in police investigations. The lab provides forensic criminalistics, including a department of ocular inspections of crime scenes and investigation of accidents, explosions, and more. The first water park in the small municipality of San Juan de Limay, Department of Esteli, was opened just before Holy Week. It has 2 pools and is the first stage of a much larger aquatic park, said Mayor Flor Maria Mendoza. High school students are participating in workshops on transgenic foods, GMOs, and their harmful effects on the environment and health as part of the celebration of the International Day of Science and Technology. They learn how GMOs lead to more resistance and how they damage other crops, the water, and the soil. The new Right to Choose and Duty to Respect booklet was presented to Christian leaders and other organizations in April. The objective is to promote love and unity in families. Foreign Minister Dennis Moncada said that since 2007, the government has promoted a solid model of diversity equity through actions that contribute to well-being in a diverse world with the duty to respect the diversity of all people. He said that this booklet is an instrument of peace to reaffirm that love in families allows them to find the way to accept the diversity of identities. All of us must foster respect within our own communities. And once again, Nicaragua was recognized by the Pan American Health Organization for having the highest COVID vaccination rate in the region, with more than 95% of the population fully and voluntarily vaccinated. The next three items I'm sharing with you because of recent disinformation about the church, about the government and the church in Nicaragua. There have been a lot of articles saying that Nicaragua wasn't allowing activities outside of churches. So here you go. This is in March, more than 40,000 attended an evangelistic crusade in Chinandega, and people were there from 13 municipalities. Also at the end of March, near the time of Holy Week, hundreds of families from different communities made a pilgrimage to the shrine of Jesus del Rescate in handmade carts pulled by oxen, a trip believers have made for more than 300 years to Popoyhuapa Rivas. Margarita Arcia, 90 years old, said that throughout her life, she has never once missed the pilgrimage. My mother taught me, and that's how I began going. She taught us to go see Jesus, who appeared on a mountain to a man who kept oxen. And I personally have seen this over many, many years. You're driving someplace and you see hundreds of people with these handmade carts and their oxen going to Popoyhuapa. And finally, Bishop Alvarez had a visit from siblings on March 25th at the National Penitentiary System in Tipitapa. Family reunions in these penitentiary centers allow families and friends to enjoy a moment of tranquility with their loved ones. Also within the penitentiary system, courses are offered for the inmates' education given by the National Technological Institute, INATEC. And as part of the guarantee of integral health for inmates, a new modern dental clinic was recently opened here. Thanks so much. Back to you, Barbara.
Thank you, Nan. The part that I got to see was very interesting. I was especially pleased to see the water park in San Juan de Limay, where I've spent a fair amount of time in the past and look forward to seeing again. And so now we will move on to our featured speakers from University of Maryland. I'll mention each briefly by name and I'll ask them to wave when their name is called. The first is Rick Cohn, Professor of Animal Science. And then Mariana da Silva, a graduate student in Animal Science. Katia Beltran, a senior majoring in chemistry and criminology. Virginia Borda, a senior majoring in environmental science policy and wildlife biology. And Franz Stupard, retired and also a student at the Institute of Applied Agriculture. Okay, so now I will introduce Professor Rick Cohn and he'll lead their presentation afterward. Dr. Cohn's research involves quantifying the environmental impacts of agriculture and improving environmental management of farms. His research has been funded by the USDA, EPA, and World Bank. He's collaborated on projects in the US, Nigeria, India, Colombia, and Nicaragua. And he has co-authored 4 books. In 1987-88, He worked as an extensionist in Nicaragua, and he's traveled back to that country several times since then. Most recently, when he led a study abroad course in January of this year. Rick Cohn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for having me today, or all of us today. As part of our study abroad class, we went to Nicaragua, not just to see the beautiful country, but to learn about agriculture and the environment and to become more inspired. Let me explain. Nicaragua is setting an example for sustainable development that we can all learn from. Hunger, poverty, illiteracy are major issues plaguing much of the world, and climate change is one of the greatest threats to humans on the planet. A common narrative that we hear is that improving the standard of living of poor people will increase greenhouse gas emissions. And at the same time, we know the effects of climate change, including droughts or hurricanes, affect agriculture and in turn worsen hunger and poverty. It's common for people to become overwhelmed and depressed thinking about these issues, which makes you want to turn away and ignore them. That's why the inspiration and hope that we get from Nicaragua is so important. Because in Nicaragua, we have a case where all of these issues are addressed and the people who live there are thriving while emanating 1/8 as much greenhouse gas per person as in the US. Nicaragua has eliminated hunger, produces 90% of their own food, as well as food exports. They have greatly reduced illiteracy, and they provide free public education from grade school through professional school. They've increased life expectancy, they've drastically decreased infant mortality, and they provide free basic health care to everyone. Their economy is still growing strongly across all sectors, despite illegal US sanctions and interventions. Of course, it would be doing better if they were still able to access as many international financing options as they used to have, but the US has brought those to a trickle. The US government and corporate managers tell us that developing countries need to follow the US example to make their agricultural processes more efficient. But our system of agriculture was developed through genocide of native populations and slavery, and today is still driven by corporate profit motive. When Nicaraguans followed our advice in the past, either from around the mid-1800s through the times of Somoza, or during the neoliberal period from 1990 to 2006, their economies sometimes became more efficient by US standards. But while income disparity increased, people went hungry, illiteracy skyrocketed. So today, after 500 years of colonialism and intervention in Nicaragua, their per capita GDP is the third lowest in the hemisphere. However, because of the choices they've made in recent years, their economic activity is targeted toward meeting the needs of the entire population instead of only serving the interests of the wealthiest Nicaraguans and the foreign investors. And this means that instead of targeting their economy on weapons of war, security and surveillance and consumerism, they've focused on healthcare, education, infrastructure like roads and hospitals and parks. And we can see firsthand what this is like. As Nan's first slide showed us, the third least poverty. So in a way, they are the third least poor country in Latin America, even while their GDP is the third lowest. The statistics from Nicaragua are compelling, of course. Nicaragua is still a poor country, and agricultural production is still labor intensive, but it is improving in ways that meet multiple objectives for human needs, for food, education, medicine, reducing poverty, saving the environment, while adapting to climate change that our system has caused. I developed the course because I think we need to understand what Nicaragua is doing to see if we can learn from their example. As we traveled around Nicaragua, we could see viable agricultural production everywhere. We listened to farmers, agricultural and environmental experts and leaders. We tasted luscious fruits and vegetables and savory dishes. We learned specific techniques to manage soils and animals. But beyond the techniques of the farm, I was especially interested in seeing how they transferred the knowledge from farmer to farmer through organizations like the ATC, how they made laws like the Agroecology law, the Zero Hunger law, the Zero Usury laws to protect land ownership. Moreover, we learned about their philosophy, their democratic, people-centered approach to making decisions and implementing changes. If you're a student, I want to invite you to take one of our classes at UMD. I want to acknowledge the ATC for helping organize and for hosting our study abroad class and the fall seminar. The ATC offers many programs, both online and in person. So consider being a part of one of those delegations or an internship. And there's a link in the chat for some of those opportunities, including a summer internship that's in July that they're recruiting for now. I want to encourage everyone to travel to Nicaragua and see for yourself what it's like to live there and how people thrive in a sustainable way. Now, I will pass this on to Mariana, graduate student in our department, Animal Science, who is originally from Brazil, and let her take it from here.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I am Mariana. I am getting my master's degree in animal science at UMD. And like Dr. Con says, I am from Brazil. First, I would like to thank you for inviting me to speak in the webinar. That's very nice. And if I had to focus on something to speak about Nicaragua, that would be the incorporation of how the ancestral knowledge that has been passed through many, many generations is actually being used nowadays to fight climate change and to mitigate the effects of it. So even though when I signed for the course, I had high expectations because it would be the first time I would be traveling for a Central American country, I would say all my expectations were definitely fulfilled. It was an amazing trip. I felt like I was home most of the trip because people there are very, like, they let you feel in family, and that's something you don't find everywhere. So it's a very special place, I would say. Other than that, specifically talking about agriculture, I have always heard about how we need to make changes and how we need to take action on agriculture to make it more sustainable. I never had the immersive context of how can we do that. And in several occasions in different cities that we were in Nicaragua, we were exposed to simple practices that people have been doing for many, many years and that work very well. One of them is, for instance, how they seed the crops in a curvilinear way according to the inclination of the soil, so that avoids that when it rains a lot, the land would slide. And that's a simple practice that people could use, but instead, like I said, I am from Brazil, and in there you see a lot of land being taken by big corporations, and what they try to do is planify the land. So instead of working with what you already have, what nature's gave you, we try to modify it. And the thing is, nature is a cycle. You cannot take more than what you give. And I feel like Nicaragua has understood this concept. I feel like people in there are working in a way that they give to the land, they take care of the land because they understood that everything is connected. So another example that I can give is that they mix the crops. So like if you have different kinds of fruits and vegetables being grown in the same piece of land, you will not be sucking the same nutrients and causing soil exhaustion. And that's fantastic, because this way you can have a permanent culture which will not be draining all the nutrients. Other thing that happens, like where big corporations are taking place, is that you fight the natural fauna. And in Nicaragua, instead of they fighting the pests, like for instance the birds that attack the crops, they simply hang a fruit or a vegetable that is more attractive to them. So that's like how diverting the attention of this called pests, but are like the natural fauna, and allowing human developments to exist in peace with nature. And that's something that like every day we'll be talking more and more about that, because climate change is there and we need to do something about it. So all of these practices that I am talking about, they are being passed for generations for many, many times. And I feel like every time that we are taking a step into the future, we are kind of detaching from this knowledge that we should have been using for many, many years. And now we have to rescue that. So one more practice that I found very interesting is that they use the waste, the fruits, the vegetables that they cannot sell for uniformity reasons or another pattern that the market regulates. They, instead of throwing it away, like happens in many situations, they use it as a biofertilizer. So they mix it with water and other natural ingredients, and they give it back to Earth. So it makes it very sustainable. And if you think about the integration of sustainable agriculture to also sustainable development, you see an opportunity that, in my opinion, is being very well placed with an association with the National Agrarian University of Nicaragua, in which they are trying to expand this knowledge for the people and also bring a scientific view. So I feel like they are integrating it very well, and I am very grateful for the experience. And I feel like if people are interested in taking this winter course, they definitely should, because it's an immersive experience. I am an experienced traveler, so I have traveled many countries around the world, and Nicaragua is definitely on my top travels from all times. So it will always have a place on my heart, and that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, it's my turn. Hello, everyone. My name is Katia Beltran. I am a senior at the University of Maryland, double majoring in chemistry and criminology. I took this course because I was interested in Nicaragua and I didn't really know much about it. Unlike a lot of my fellow peers, I had no, past experience with like agroecology or anything like that. So I found this course very fascinating and I learned a lot. I think I did go to Nicaragua with a lot of stereotypes and misconceptions that were very quickly debunked. And I, learned to really appreciate the work that they've done and how far they've come. And, in certain areas that the US still struggles with, which was like really impressive. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Santa Julia cooperative that we visited and how life has drastically changed for them. So in the past, their land was a big coffee farm, but now it's actually run by a women's cooperative. And this women's cooperative is composed of 83 families with around 160 men and women, 60 children, and 11 elderly. During the Somoza years, the intensive plantation of coffee had around 500 workers. And she was describing how they all lived in this big house with really terrible working conditions. They would oftentimes get really sick and not have enough food. And they would work 12 hours per day from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m., deprived of their rights, healthcare, education, and very, very low salaries. Now they have a lot of better conditions, and a lot of these conditions came about through better machinery, and they would have a process to remove the peels of the coffee beans, and they also used a concept known as agroecology, which was like the main focus of our course, that became more so like their lifestyle. And it was really impressive to see like how they use the biodiversity of plants, and like Mariana was describing all these like crops in the different parts of the plant, and they didn't really waste anything. And they could recover dry and malnutrition soil by using these plants as like a natural and organic fertilizer. And additionally, they did talk about violence in the past, especially with like men against women, and it was normal for women to have up to like 18 children, and now they have more like 1 to 2. And they've also improved sexual education for young teenagers as well. And so I thought that was like a really impressive thing for Nicaragua to do. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is one of the biggest things that I took from Nicaragua that I was really surprised about was that actually the 3 of us got sick. And I was very, very impressed with the Nicaragua healthcare system, and how when we were taken to, I forget what it's called, I guess the doctor, like the healthcare system, they made us feel like family and like we were well taken care of. There was no discrimination just because we were like from the US. La Clínica, yes. La Clínica. And, we were tested, and it was very, fast, and they prescribed us medications and treated us like their own. And our families would like make us soup out of like our water so that we could like heal. And they really, really treated us like family, and it's nothing like I've ever experienced before. And I can just, assume that if a Nicaraguan came to the US and got sick, that our healthcare system would not treat them in that same manner, with so much generosity and so much love. So yeah, that was like an amazing thing that I got from Nicaragua. And, I really just changed my whole concept of what I, had envisioned, and, saw how loving and caring they really are. I think Virginia's next.
Hi, I'm Virginia. I study environmental science and policy at UMD. I'm concentrated in wildlife ecology. So the moment I saw this trip available on the Education Abroad website, I absolutely gravitated toward it. I'd been really excited to travel outside the country. I was especially interested in going to Latin America because of the biodiversity, and I knew a little bit of Spanish and wanted to improve. Tons of different reasons that I was drawn to this trip. So I was overjoyed when I found out that I had the opportunity to go. I really didn't know what to expect. I didn't know really anything about Nicaragua before I visited. So it was fascinating to meet people and so quickly be thrust into a new environment, but an environment that wasn't so driven by tourism, that people were very welcoming and excited to meet people from a different region, not looking to capitalize on it. Because I know visiting different countries can be exciting and scary experience, but we felt so welcomed, and just the people really were happy to see us. I want to talk a little bit about agroecology specifically, because I am currently working on a capstone project studying agroforestry through the Nature Conservancy. And if you don't know, agroforestry is using agriculture and forestry and ecology all married together to do the most sustainable forms of forestry and agriculture in order to support the environment. And a lot of these agroforestry practices have come from Central and South America. And I witnessed it before I even knew what it was called firsthand in Nicaragua. Mariana touched on this when she was talking about how they would plant different plants to support the wildlife. And when we were visiting a pineapple farm, they specifically pointed out some mango trees that they had planted. And those mango trees were designed to feed native species. So it was just so moving to think, when they saw, okay, these native species are eating our pineapple, and rather than let's spray some chemical or let's poison the native species so that they leave, the solution was, let's just give them something else to eat. It was so simple, but it just was so moving to me, because it was so unlike the way that natural resources are handled in the US. And it was something that I couldn't stop thinking about. I bring it up all the time to my capstone group, but I just found it to be so beautiful. And then another really incredible sustainable practice, we talk a lot about composting here in America, and in Nicaragua, it was practically a cut off the middleman situation. After dinner, we would go and we would scrape all of our food into little containers, and then they would feed it to the chickens and the dogs and the different animals. It was really awesome just to see such a straightforward management of waste. We also were able to visit a dump/recycling plant that they had, where they were using those natural fertilizers that Mariana mentioned. And just generally, the Nicaraguan approach to environmental management was so clearly rooted in love and support of nature and the environment. And it seemed so obvious, like any alternative would have been not, I guess silly is not the right word, but it would have seemed absurd. And in America, of course, it's very much utilize the resource to the most of our ability and then deal with the consequences. So again, just to see this differing perspective of land use and resource management was so inspiring. And I had so much to learn. And I just really wish that everyone could understand that just a simple change in perspective can be so monumental to managing natural resources. And as an environmental science student, I think I was one of the only environmental science students that was there. It was more animal science based. And I hadn't taken a lot of animal science courses before. So learning about agriculture was just absolutely fascinating, fantastic. So basically a lot to learn. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say, but incredible experience. I think Franz is next, but he appears to be muted. I'm not sure.
Let me take care of that right now. Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. My name is Franz Tupard, and as Rick introduced me, I am a retired federal employee. I spent 30 years working in Washington, D.C., in the area where the World Bank is located. If you know Washington, D.C., you know the World Bank, you know it will exactly between the White House and the State Department. My alma mater is the George Washington University, which is exactly in the same neighborhood. I studied political science. I studied international economics. I studied government. I ended up working with government, as I mentioned, for 30 years. Truly, I would say that my calling is international economic development. By that, I mean finding ways for countries to get ahead, for countries to beat poverty. And the reason that I selected or I'm on that path is because I was born in Haiti. As you all know, Haiti is located in, we can say Central America, but more specifically in the Caribbean. And as Nan Graf showed during her presentation, the very first graph, 2022 poverty indices, you could see that Nicaragua is the third least poor country on that list. And if you paid attention, you will see Haiti is on the other side of the three most challenging countries with poverty. It is Honduras, Haiti, and Guatemala. So after retirement, I decided to go back to the classroom to study sustainable agriculture because agriculture is one of the biggest challenges that most third world countries are facing. And food is one, illiteracy is another one, poor healthcare or lack of healthcare is another one. When I saw the advertising or announcement on that trip to Nicaragua, and it mentioned that Nicaragua has been able to provide up to 90% of its food, I said, wow, I need to go see for myself if it's just that propaganda or if it's for real. I met with Rick, and even though I'm not into animal science, but I'm into sustainable agriculture, Rick said, Franz, you're on board. Let's go to Nicaragua. So I went to Nicaragua and I spent 2 wonderful weeks seeing what I needed to see. And I can tell you from what I've seen, the problem that Haiti is facing, and by using Haiti I can use all the other poor countries in the world. Nicaragua is solving them. Nicaragua being on the list of the 3 least poor countries, meaning that Nicaragua is well on its way to solve that problem of poverty. And this is where I will stop so I can open the conversation for questions.
Well, I want to thank all of you for these really interesting presentations. And now we'll turn to the questions and answers. Thanks to those of you who have all posted some questions in the Q&A. Please keep those questions coming. We have time to do more of them. Nan McCurdy and I will take turns in posing questions to the speakers. And since there are 5 of you, I guess decide among yourselves who wants to speak and raise your hand or something and decide among yourselves. I'd like to start by asking a question based on something that Rick told me yesterday, which is, did any of you while you were in Nicaragua experience any health issues? And if so, what was your experience with the healthcare in the country?
So Katya touched on this, but she and I both actually got sick while we were there. And yeah, we honestly, as silly as it sounds, we had a lovely experience. Like we were pretty ill too. Like we were not doing so well. We actually returned from the hospital and multiple people commented on how rough we looked, but the clinical care was incredible. We arrived and we had to wait for probably about 30 minutes, but honestly, that's very much the same as what you would experience in the US in healthcare. I think probably wait like 30 minutes to an hour to be treated. And so they took us back. We were given different tests for our conditions. And then probably the most moving part of it for me was the doctor, he insisted that we drink our, like, they had these electrolytes for us that didn't taste very good, but he wouldn't let us leave until we drank them. And it was so sweet because he really cared that we like got our electrolytes. Like he was like, I'm not giving you your antibiotic. I'm not giving you your prescription until you drink your Suero. That was what it was called, Suero. And it became a running joke because it did not taste good, but we did drink it. And we were given antibiotics and zinc, and anti-nausea medicine, just generally treated so well. They were so caring. And yeah, we saw there were plenty of other people being treated as well. Like it wasn't like we were at the front of the queue or anything like that. We saw some other people in there for, I think, like some people for maybe dog bites, stuff like that. But the facility was large. It was very clean. It was very open, as the buildings in Nicaragua are. It was very open. But yeah, and then of course at the end, I almost instinctually looked to Erica, who was one of the, she works with the ATC and she took us to the clinic, and I looked at her and I was like, wait, do I pay? And she's like, no, you're done. So it was, I didn't even have to show insurance or anything. So it felt so crazy to just walk in, be treated, get your prescription, and then leave. And obviously, I think that's how it should be, but it was quite startling, the ease at which we were able to be treated. All we had to do, the most difficult part was driving down La Montañita, which was the mountain that we were on top of when we became ill. But yeah, wonderful healthcare system from our limited experience.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad you guys got sick. It's made for wonderful stories. So here's a question about farming that any of you can answer. This person says, farmers everywhere need to understand the importance of contour plowing. And I would add to that contour terracing. Anyone? Rick?
I guess Mariana brought it up, but yes, I find it really interesting that even when you drive through the countryside in Pennsylvania and you drive down the hills, they will plant the corn by machine straight up and down the hills, which causes erosion right between the rows. And so just the planting in a contour parallel or perpendicular to the slope saves a lot of erosion. But then in Nicaragua, they also taught us how they do contour ditches, where they dig ditches and they measure it by a ancestral method to measure the slope and then determine how close the ditches need to be. But those ditches are not to drain water away, they're to hold the water when it rains. So before the runoff starts to occur, the water runs into the ditch and then sits there until it can be slowly absorbed by the crops. And so there are the ditches, and then you have the terrace, which is the flattening the slopes at different levels, which takes a bit more work. And they don't do that quite as often in Nicaragua as they do in some of the other countries. But all of these things are ancestral methods. And as Mariana spoke, we learned agriculture from the Mayans and the Native Americans, the Europeans, and we didn't learn it well enough. And then we forgot a lot of it, and they didn't forget. They already were doing mixing legumes and non-legumes to have that cross-fertilization, fertilize the soil with the nitrogen from the legumes. They were already doing things that we had no idea of, and also had domesticated corn, beans, squash, potatoes, pretty much most of our diet. So that knowledge they had, it's really important. And the contours, we don't do that commonly in the US, not even planting, let alone the ditches. So they really are ahead of us on some of these techniques. And then when you have a hurricane, you have a lot of rain, where they do this, you don't have mudslides. And so it's also a practice that relates to climate change, that we need to adapt it more because of climate change.
Now, here is a question from Jerry Condon. And greetings, Jerry. I know you've been sailing around and you're about to head for Baltimore shortly. You're in DC on the Golden Rule sailboat. So a boat for peace. Anyway, Jerry is asking, is it possible to be one of the poorest countries and yet to have the least amount of people in poverty? How is that possible?
I'll answer if no one else does, but I didn't want to answer them all. But I think the thing, and I think Virginia has written about this, and Franz has talked about it and written about it. The issue isn't how much of a GDP you have, but what do you do with your economic activity? You can have all kinds of things that you don't need, or you can have a society that focuses first on everybody having enough, everybody having what they do need. And I think that's the difference. So in Nicaragua, poverty is lower in terms of percentage of people in poverty than in a lot of wealthier countries, where the wealthy people aren't as wealthy, but they're focused on meeting the needs of the population. Virginia, do you want to follow it, or Franz?
It says Magda Lanuza, I hope I'm not butchering that name, sent something in the chat that I think is, like, couldn't have said it better myself. But they said that they always say Nicaragua is one of the poorest countries in the region, but unique because even poor people have access to health, education, and food. And I would definitely concur with that. I remember Ari, our translator, also mentioned that I think like 90% of the country, maybe more, is on the electrical power grid. So I think, I don't know, it sort of speaks to the way that people are managed within the country, that even people the country might be poor, but the instances of poverty are not the same because people are being provided free healthcare. Like I just mentioned, people are able to have access to food, like food sovereignty is happening. We didn't see homeless people like when we were walking around. For example, even in College Park, where we go to school here, there's multiple homeless people that just live about in the city, and it's so normalized. And I remember that was something else that when I came back from Nicaragua, it's like, that's really fast. There's people that truly do not have access to food because not only can they not afford to purchase food, they don't even have land where they could grow food, which is the most simple thing in the world. That's the whole reason we exist, because food grows out of the ground and we eat it. But yeah, so just, I think the government there is giving people access to the natural resources that they need to just have the bare minimum of surviving, if that makes sense. Or that was my impression. I appreciate that Dr. Cohn answered first because he's much more of a Nicaragua expert than I am, but that was my perspective. So thank you, Magda, for that comment.
Friends?
Yes, Nan, can you put back that
Sure.
chart, please? 2022, it
Yeah.
was in Spanish,
Yeah.
the poverty, if you know which one I'm talking about. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, that's the one. Thank you. Okay. If you can see that chart there, they are all Latin American countries listed, Caribbean included. As you can see, Nicaragua is among the least poor countries. So they manage to resolve a lot of the issues that the other countries are facing with. For instance, Costa Rica is known to be, quote unquote, a richer country, yet Nicaragua is doing much better than Costa Rica. And if you keep going up, Argentina is known also to be doing much better as far as poverty is concerned, yet their problem seems to be a lot more than Nicaragua. It means that Nicaragua somehow manages to resolve the basic problem associated with poverty. Number one is food security. They resolve that by being 90% food self-sufficient and sovereign. Sovereign means that they do not have to import what they need. They produce it themselves. Another indication that they are doing much better than the other one is the level of literacy in the country. And the third one is that healthcare problem that other countries have. Nicaragua has a good healthcare system, and it is also available and free for all citizens, not only citizens, but also to visitors, as 5 of us traveling last January experience. So that's where the difference is between Nicaragua and the other countries.
I want to add just a couple of things. The Sandinista Front for National Liberation, in their very first program in the 60s, number one in that program and in all their programs is ending poverty. They have a huge program about ending poverty. So I would guess another, now without a coup or without hurricanes or without a pandemic, another couple of years, I'm guessing that poverty level will get down to under 20%, which would be great. And also, just so everyone knows, we have time for more questions. We have a few more questions here in the Q&A. One here from Magda. This is to the students. How would you recommend Nicaragua for U.S. university students? What were your favorite cultural and agricultural learnings?
I can answer that one.
Go ahead.
So I would say not only for the American students, but for all students, it will be a nice experience to, independently of the country you are, because like Nicaragua has a very specific way of dealing with agriculture and also with policies, and all decision making is, I would say is less centralized and more in the hand of people. So it's an interesting experience independently of the country you are. And if I had to choose like one may take home one may take home, I forgot the word, cultural, sorry, cultural differences that I would like to share with you is that the sense of community that they have. So basically, if something works for me, I hope it works for you, and then we can build a strong base, which is not something that you see a lot in the more capitalistic countries where individuality is seen as more of a goal than the community takeaway. So, and agriculturally, it's hard to choose one, but if I had to choose, I would say that is mixing crops, because that definitely makes a difference. That allows them to preserve the natural flora and fauna and allows them to conserve the soils. So if I had to choose, those will be the two. And there's one more question that I will just like to answer quickly, that is about the animal science. So like, how does animal farming differs from here? And I will say that like it's much less intensive. So you have less animals confined in the same space. And not, I mean, I see that the world is looking towards that direction and fairly doing that, because this way you actually allow the animal to be an animal. Like the chickens are free, they are like walking on the soil, getting their nutrients, like being actually chicken instead of being trapped into cages where they basically cannot move their whole lives. And the same thing goes for cattle too, because instead of they're seeding a type of grass and then just like killing completely the natural fauna, they allow the cattle to rotate towards different pastures. So like it's a much more man to cow work. I see they were always like dealing with the animal, and that I mean, in my opinion, that makes it more acceptable. If we have to use animals, and we do need to use animals for like the development of society, we should do it in a way that not only allows us to conserve the environment, but allows the animal to be an animal. So that's something that was very important for me, and I would like to share. So thank you.
Thank you. Katia, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, so I do think this is a really crucial experience. I think for me personally, if I'm being really honest, I got very scared right before I went to Nicaragua. I like realized how many like vaccinations they recommend. Like it was typhoid, yellow fever, hepatitis A. And I was starting to get stressed out about going to a country that I had stereotypically thought of like with diseases and like poor people. That's how I was like envisioning it. And just going to Nicaragua and having this experience, I feel like I became a better person too, as well. And, you know, their hospitality really like opened up my mind and like made me really rethink the way I thought of other developing countries. And it makes me want to travel more and visit those developing countries and understand how they live. And I think the only way to do that is to go to Nicaragua. Like we can tell you all these things that we've experienced and how amazing and wonderful the people are, but you will only understand it when you're there and how beautiful it is and like the connections you create, not only with the families we stayed with, but also the peers that you go with. It was just something so unique and special. And I just don't think I've ever been like felt so welcomed. And I guess I was gonna hop onto like another question. So I don't know if you want me to wait for that question to come up.
Go ahead.
Okay. I was gonna talk about the hospitality question of like how they were like hospitable, I guess. So I stayed with Iris and her 16-year-old son Douglas, his wife, who was a 13-year-old named Ixel, and her youngest daughter Duglesi. And they were so amazing. I felt very at home. Me and Mariana stayed with them. And they would always offer us food and like, you know, whatever we wanted, like in a specific way. Like she was ready to like make us it. When we both were feeling a little bit sick, she continuously throughout the day would check in on us, even when she had her own stuff going on. You know, she ran her farm and took care of all the animals by herself. Her husband's in the US for 2 years doing construction work. So, you know, she had 6 pigs and she was telling me how she had like killed them and like, you know, cooked it and all that. And it just really went against like the whole like stereotypical roles of like men and women that I feel like Nicaragua has really, you know, gotten rid of on these farms and everything. And yeah, I mean, when I was sick home for most of the day, Ixel would like come and talk to me about like her life, and we would have like really interesting conversations. And like I kind of realized, with no cellular data, I'm like, I didn't know what to do with all my time. And, it was just really fascinating to lean into the experience and, kind of put myself into like what her life is. And I asked her, I was like, what do you do in your free time? And she's like, nothing. And I was like, nothing. What, like, I do think like in the US, the lifestyle is very different of, if you have free time, you're doing something with that free time. And so it was just a really, beautiful experience. And I didn't only experience hospitality, I saw it, which also goes to what Mariana was saying, where like with crops and everything, like she had her own machinery it was like to grind up the corn. I don't know what it's called. Dr. Cohn.
She had a grinder,
A grinder. There you go.
mechanical grinder.
I think
Yeah.
it was a mill that she had.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
called
was a
mill.
meal. Yeah.
A
Right.
mill like in her house, and people would just stop in, like they would just come into the door into her house. And I was just like really not used to it. Like I would be in a towel coming out of the shower and like, oh, hello, like, so it was, the hospitality there and just like really caring for other people and what they had to go, their lifestyles, and making sure they had the products they needed and stuff was really inspiring to see.
I'm going to pass it back to Barbara, but I feel like I need to say something about the vaccination question. I've facilitated dozens, if not more than 100 delegations since 1984. I mean, really back when there wasn't the healthcare system there is today. And you've never needed to have vaccinations, special vaccinations to go to Nicaragua. The only one would be if you're going to really be doing work in the countryside, maybe a booster of a tetanus booster. But that, I'm guessing that list of vaccines must have come from the US Embassy. Back to you, Barbara.
Well, I want to thank everybody for their answers to the question about hospitality, because that was going to be my next one anyway. And instead, I'll move on now to Yoav's question. Can you explain a little bit more? You've already, of course, been dealing with the question of food sovereignty and self-sufficiency. What did you see about how Nicaragua has achieved that level of self-sufficiency? How did they do it?
Do you want to go, Rick, or should I go?
You can go, Franz.
Yes. The way they achieve that is through ATC. ATC is an acronym for Association of Trabajadores de Campinos, and roughly translated into Association of Rural Workers. From what I understand, this movement started in 1975. It was a grassroots movement that they saw it was a problem, and with Edgardo Garcia, who spearheaded that movement, they get involved into agroecology, which is the system that they use throughout Latin America to cultivate the land, to the point where most of what I saw, every parcel, every inches of Nicaragua is being productive. That's how they solved it. And there are two universities that were introduced to. It's Agrarian University, and the other one is Latin America Institute for Agroecology. Their focus is agroecology, self-sufficiency, food production, to the point where they reach that level.
Yeah, I could add, not really add much, but just to clarify that the ATC really promoted the land reform with the revolution once they became legal after the 1979 insurrection. And because they had that land reform, to me, that was the most essential thing, because when only a few rich people own all of the land, the only way for these poor farmers to produce food would be to try to steal land or squat on land or something owned by somebody else. And the land was being used for export crops because that was bringing in the money. So there was no real incentive for them to produce food because the people who needed the food didn't have money. So if I'm a landowner, I'm not going to make money by selling food. I want to sell an export crop to somebody with money. So it's just a way in which our system of export agriculture didn't work for many generations. And land reform was definitely a huge part of them being able to then own the land and then take care of the land and improve the land. But then, of course, all the education that went with that. And there have been questions about the, is it all agroecology? Is it all these sorts of methods? The food production pretty much, I think, is mostly by methods of the campesinos, the smaller farmers. But yeah, there's a lot of export agriculture as well. It's a mixed economy and there's some of both, and both are doing fine. But, so it's very interesting that there's enough of an opening for them to produce enough of their own food.
Here's kind of a similar question. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to follow that up. Helen Ewell asked a related question. I thought maybe we ought to add it in here. Just how is it calculated? Let's see, how did she say this? How is food sovereignty calculated in terms of, you said 90% or whatever? Is there some kind of international system that measures that?
I don't know if anyone knows that answer that's here. I generally assumed it to mean that 90% of their food, and I know they're also considering the inputs to produce the food as an aspect of the calculation. So having to buy fertilizer and import that is not completely independent, but I'm not sure if that's in the calculation. But I don't know exactly how it's calculated. Does anybody? I would look into that, though. That is a good question.
Sorry, Nan, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to give him that question. So Paul Fitch says his wife is from a town in eastern El Salvador, close to Nicaragua, and that there are many Nicaraguans who go there to work and having to do with the impoverishment in Nicaragua. And I'd like to answer that question for Paul. I lived for many in the 1980s in San Juan de Limay, which is relatively close to the border with Honduras. So when people left to work, they tended to go to El Salvador instead of go to Costa Rica. So it's kind of a historic thing that people from that area of Nicaragua go to El Salvador to work. Why is there so much impoverishment of Nicaragua? It's historical. They weren't allowed to develop like so much of Latin America. But I think the big difference today is that the resources they get are used so carefully and used so that the people have all of the basics. But the problem is in an area like San Juan de Limay, where most people are farmers, if they're lucky enough to have a little bit of land, let's say, 20 acres, they might have 3 kids, 4 kids, 5 kids, and it's enough land so that one of those kids can stay in Limay and farm. But it's not enough land so that all 5 kids can have families and stay and farm. So what do? They migrate as agricultural workers, primarily to El Salvador. Go ahead, Barbara.
Okay. Here's a question from Leslie Salgado. What percentage of the farming in Nicaragua follows this type of farming method, ATC and other agroecology project methods? Are there national laws that mandate this? And what about large landowners such as tobacco and coffee producers? Are they also following these methods or some other method?
Well, I think Nan might have a better answer, but Niels McCune spoke to our class, and I think he said it was about half and half. Sort of this popular economy versus a more commercial economy of agriculture. And I don't think I answered all of the parts of that question. Do you remember reminding me what the other parts were?
Are there any national laws that mandate?
Oh, yeah. So there's an agroecology law, there's the zero usury laws, there's zero hunger laws, and all of these things are mostly encouraging the possibilities for the agroecology and the agriculture opportunities for the lower income people.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, Nan?
There's one more question. How can we get industrial farmers to go and learn in Nicaragua?
I think that's a great idea. I know there have been some programs and that there have been some that have gone down. I think the ATC also invites farmers to come down. So if there's any industrial farmers that see this presentation are interested in learning some of these methods, I'm sure they would be welcome.
Katya?
I mean, I think a big thing with like industrial farmers and stuff is that in Nicaragua, I kind of noticed that a lot of stuff is done by hand. And I just think like some of these things aren't going to translate into the US, like into other areas as much. Like when we were on the pina farm, I was like, how do you get all of these pinas like on the hill? And like it was really a lot of land. And just the fact that they go around with like a machete and cut them off like was like really incredible. And I know that we didn't see any, but we did talk about how on like bigger farms they do have like machinery to help out. But I'm not sure like how it would translate. I don't know if Dr. Cohn, you want to like, if you have any thoughts on like that as well.
No, I think that the strategy for a country like Nicaragua and for a lot of Latin America is to focus on commodities that don't benefit from industrialization. So you focus on crops that really have to be picked by hand, like coffee and pineapple. Those crops are going to be picked by hand, and so there's kind of a competitive advantage because they have lots of hands, and they don't necessarily have the capital to industrialize. But I think you're seeing Nicaragua industrialize slowly, maybe not even that slowly, but it is a process. But it's been a long time that they've been very poor, and I don't think there's a problem with them with the farmers using some methods that can save labor, but their agriculture is really more, there's a lot of attention to being very efficient in use of the land, being very efficient in preservation of the environment, less efficient in labor. And that is kind of part of the what they chose to look at all of those aspects instead of just looking at the bottom line of maximizing economic return for the individual farmer.
Yeah, I can add 2 words to that one. Remember, Nicaragua is not an industrialized country. It is part of the developing countries, meaning that they do not have access to a lot of capitals to work the land. Therefore, labor is the best way they can go. So the people use basic tools to work the land as humans have done for millennium. And while we were in Nicaragua, I looked around, I did not see a lot of tractors. I remember seeing a couple of them, but not a whole lot. But people have their machetes, their hoes, they are not afraid of working. And one of the things that I also noticed, it looks like they work nonstop. Here in the US, we work 40 hours a week. Over there, it looks like, at least while I was there, they work 7 days a week. So that's it. If you work, you see the result of your work. That's how they did it.
Well, we are now at the time that we said and a little bit beyond. I think this has been wonderful. I just have so much enjoyed just speaking for myself, hearing all of your presentations. I'm wondering if we could go around and each of you could say like one last thing. Is something that you that occurs to you now that you haven't said yet. Maybe start with Rick.
Well, thank you. I wanted to thank the all of the comments in the chat, and I probably haven't even been able to read all of them, but very, very much very thoughtful comments. And yes, if you haven't gone to Nicaragua, and I know there's some comparisons about Cuba, which I know I need to go to, as having a lot of similarities. I think it's something you have to do. You have to go there to really appreciate and to really learn what it's like, and to really get a sense for the philosophy that they're operating with.
Well, I guess if we're following the same order, I should speak now. So yeah, like Dr. Cohn said, what I what I have to say as my final message is that I am very grateful for the whole experience. And for the people that want to go or are interested in the program, I would say that keep an open mind, because we always try to keep our own thoughts and our own views of the universe, but we can learn a lot from other people, from other perspectives. So keep an open mind and see where the world takes you.
Yeah, I would say it was an amazing experience. I met amazing people, had, even through sickness, a really great experience, not just learning in our course, but also the fun things we did that were really beautiful, like horseback riding on a volcano, like jumping into a lagoon. And so Nicaragua is beautiful and full of beautiful people, and definitely one of the greatest places I've visited thus far in my life.
Yeah, going off of what was just said, if you're lucky enough to make it to Nicaragua, do it. I had the most incredible time, and I wish the US was more. I wish the US would take some pages out of Nicaragua's book for sure. And I don't know, I still dream about waking up there, so I look forward to getting to go back one day. And yeah, I just truly think it's a beautiful country filled with incredible people. And yeah, like I said, I hope the US takes some notes. There's a lot to learn.
My turn. Thank you for the opportunity to interact with all of you over this webinar. I enjoyed my time in Nicaragua, and I guarantee you I will be back. Not once, but many other trips. I went by myself with the group. I will go back with my wife and my children, guaranteed there. And I took a lot of pictures that I shared with my network. Some of them are so impressed, all the way in Ghana. And I believe in that mini internship, there will be Ghanaians, Africa, in Nicaragua studying agroecology. And I will always spread the word. Please, 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 don't be afraid to visit Nicaragua. As Katia said, those fears, you have no need for them, it's just irrational stuff. Go enjoy Nicaragua like we did. Thank you again. Gracias a todos.
And I guess I just want to add that Rick had passed along some pictures, and I know the students wrote some blogs and so forth. So when we send out the follow-up to this webinar and the link to the recording, I think we ought to include some of those links too. Nan, do you have any final thoughts before we close out?
Just what they've been saying, please go to Nicaragua, take your friends, go any way you want to go. Going with the ATC is a wonderful way. There's you can also go with the Casa Ben Linder. You can go with Colleen Littlejohn. You can go as tourists, but go. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now. We'll
Thank
send
you.
out the recording.